Welcome, AP Human Geographers. It's more lecture time with Ms. Rydberg. I'm excited to be with you today because we are going to talk about culture. And culture is awesome because culture helps us give a sense. It gives us all a sense of place and being and belonging, but it's also messy and complicated, but super simple. And so we're going to talk about it today, and I'm very excited. So let's get started. So first thing you want to know is that culture is something that is shared by a group of people. So in order for it to be counted as culture and not just a weird, clique that you particularly have, it has to be shared by a group of people. Now, I didn't remind you to do this at the outset, but if you don't have your notes out already, you need to get your notes out because you have to take notes. Feel free to pause and rewind the video at any time because I talk super, super, super fast. But I know you can take it because you guys are AP Human Geographers, which makes you awesome. So here we go. Culture is something that is shared by a group of people. It is manifested in our practices. So the way that we go about our daily lives in our shared group practices is part of what makes up our culture. It also is part of our shared technologies. That can be part of our culture. So think about major technological innovations that were then shared by a group of people and shaped that group's sense of belonging and place. I'm thinking about things like the written word, right? Think about like hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt and how that written language actually helped give people a sense of belonging and a sense of place, which is their culture. Attitudes. Shared attitudes and beliefs and perceptions about the world can 100% be about culture. So if you believe that the individual person is more important than the entire community of people, that tells me that you are from a particular culture. Whereas if you value the community more than you value the individual person, that tells me that you are from a particular culture. You get where I'm going with this. Behaviors, how you actually choose to behave. When you get into a person's home, do you take your shoes off or do you leave them on? That tells me about your culture. When you sit down at the dinner table to eat, do you automatically go for a drink of water or do you wait until, say, for instance, the host gives a blessing? That tells me about your culture. All right, cultural traits are individual elements within the larger culture. So an individual trait is some smaller component of the greater culture. So think about things like food and architecture and land use. Oh, it's so very exciting. So here we go. Big things about culture. We have culture, which is the big idea of practices, technologies, attitudes, behaviors, and then we have culture traits, which are things like food, architecture, land, clothing, all kinds of good stuff. So I want you to keep this in mind, that the idea of the group is your culture and traits are the individual components. Let's keep going. Pause the video, see if you can answer this question. Go. All right, so pretty straightforward question. It's one of our, it's called a level 1 question in AP land. In other words, it means that it's really just looking for vocabulary. So which of the following is the belief that one's own culture is the best or better than other cultures? So we're looking for something that will say that my group's way of thinking is better than any other group's way of thinking, or is the best way of thinking in general. So ethos, no, that's just sort of part of logic. It's meant to set us aside. Prejudice could be one. Okay, we're going to keep ethnocentrism. That means that you are centered entirely, centrism entirely on your ethnicity. So that could be one. Stereotyping, that's more of what you do to other cultures as opposed to how you feel about your own culture. So let's go ahead and cross stereotyping out. And acculturation is where you are giving up your own culture in favor of the more dominant culture. So again, So what we've got is either prejudice or ethnocentrism. Now keep in mind that it's the belief that yours is best or better than. So prejudice is a negative idea, and ethnocentrism is actually where you are centered on your own ethnicity. Ethno, which is ethnicity, centrism, which is centered. So in fact, the answer here is, in fact, C, because we were able to dissect the words. You're going to know all these vocabulary words by the end of this unit. Don't worry, but I want to give you the skills of how to dissect this if you're ever met with a question and you've forgotten the vocabulary word or you just don't know it, and that's okay. Let's keep going. So Carl Sawyer is a really important human geographer, and a couple of the things that he was really focused on was that idea of how humans impact the landscape meaning the natural environment, and the fact that in general humans will in fact damage the natural environment. He very much saw that nature was damaged by human presence to nature. But an important part of Carl Sawyer's work was actually his original belief about how human cultures developed. And that was that as people started to congregate in locations, like as they started to go from being just like a small tribe to a slightly larger tribe, they started to settle down. And when they started to settle down, they started to domesticate plants and animals in order to facilitate their ability to stay and grow their cultures. So as you can see, sort of humans wanting to sort of be in a culture group, wanting to be around other people, means that they are starting to collect in locations, which means they have to start changing their physical environment, which means that eventually the physical environment can't actually sustain them, right? There's not enough, and so humans further change the land. And you'll see examples of this in the textbook of how humans change the land, specifically when we get to agriculture. So I want you to write a little note for yourself right now, is that to wait for, or to come back to Carl Sawyer when you guys get to your agriculture unit, or specifically chapter 9, okay? Because he's going to come back and he's very important, but I want to introduce him here specifically because his belief that humanity, cultures emerge because people decided to congregate in particular locations. Let's keep going. So, I've got another question for you, an AP question. According to Carl Sawyer, which of the following is true about plant domestication? Now, I just sort of told you a hint about this one, so go ahead and pause the video and see if you can answer it for me. Now, in all fairness, I didn't actually give you a ton of insight into Carl Sawyer, but you should still be able to dissect this question given the information that you have. So which of the following is true about plant domestication? So we're talking about plants going from being wild plants to being like fairly domesticated, easy to use by various people. It originated in marginal areas with limited food resources. Well, here we're asking a question is, if plant domestication happened according to Carl Sawyer, that's because people are gathering, right? Cultures are gathering together. People are gathering. So we want to ask ourselves, where is it likely that people are going to be gathering? Are they going to be gathering in areas with limited food resources to begin with? Probably not. It first occurred in diversified habitats. That's the exact opposite of what we just identified was probably not. So let's give this an option. We're not sure. It was developed by farmers who were starving and desperate for food. Well, no, because remember I said that it was developed because people were getting together. So the plant domestication didn't happen because of farmers. Farmers happened because of plant domestication. So we can say no for C. It owes its origins to the domestication of animals. That has nothing to do with Carl Sawyer, so we're going to get rid of that one. And then it was first dependent on irrigation. Again, not related to the stuff for Carl Sawyer, so the only answer here is B. Tough question. If you got it right, your skills of deduction are amazing. If you got it wrong, don't worry. We're going to come back to Carl Sawyer later, but you know a little bit about his beliefs and ideas, so let's keep going. All right, next topic. How does culture spread? Pretty easy stuff here. We're going to talk about diffusion. We've already discussed diffusion, so the idea here is that culture spreads the exact same way that people spread, the exact same way that technology spreads, the exact same way that everything spreads, and that's through diffusion. It can either relocate to places or it can expand to places, and I'm going to give you guys some examples right now of relocation diffusion and then expansion diffusion in its 3 different categories, specifically related to culture. So go ahead. Here we go. First thing that we're looking at is a picture. This is an image. This is of Chinatown in San Francisco. And although you might be fooled initially to think that you're somewhere in like downtown Beijing because of all of the writing, the logograms that you see that are Chinese characters, it is so clearly been influenced by the relocation of Far East Asian immigrants coming over to the United States and setting up this sort of clustered community within San Francisco. A couple of the giveaways that this isn't in fact Beijing is that you do still have, like, see up in the upper left-hand corner, you see that there's the Chinese New Year festival and parade is in English. So there are some indications that this isn't necessarily downtown downtown Beijing, but it's still, you still kind of have that idea that this is definitely not sort of regular Americana. This is here because Chinese immigrants have relocated from China to the United States and have set up a community through relocation diffusion. See how their culture, their language, the color scheme has relocated. Even some of the architecture, you can see some of the building tops up here that has relocated as a result of their culture. So we have, through expansion diffusion, we have hierarchical diffusion. International corporations will push their sort of global culture to other countries. So you've got the Got Talent industry, which started in America, but it's now everywhere. You've got Sweden's Got Talent, you've got Korea's Got Talent, you've got Talent. The whole, that franchise now is everywhere. Obviously, the Golden Arches with McDonald's, it's all over the world. No matter where you go, you're going to be able to find a McDonald's. The Toyota, which was is a Japanese company, but it is all over the world with manufacturing plants all over there. That cultural component, that technology of Japan has now spread beyond the Japanese borders because of expansion diffusion, specifically hierarchical, because it's done through corporations specifically and intentionally pushing their sort of vision or their culture onto other cultures. That's hierarchical. And the last one that I have here as an example for you guys is, of course, the cartoon Peppa Pig. So culture can be hierarchically pushed not just through corporations and businesses, but also through popular culture. Things like cartoons and TV shows can absolutely be popular culture that's pushed out in a hierarchical fashion. Then I've got the last two categories, which is, of course, we have our expansion diffusion, which is our contagious diffusion, and then we have stimulus diffusion. Contagious diffusion is best represented online through memes and funny things that go viral, like videos that go viral, and where everyone has just seen them, and they're funny, and they just get passed along, and that can be culture spreading itself in a contagious way. And last but not least, you have the Maharaja Mac, which is the chicken Maharaja Mac. And it's chicken because, of course, you wouldn't have beef in India as a result of the cultural preferences of India, right? The food taboo in India against beef. But you still have the cultural diffusion of the Big Mac from the United States, which is stimulus diffusion. All right, so you've seen kind of some examples of diffusion specifically related to culture through these images. I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video, take a moment, and see if you can answer this question. Go. All right, now I am hoping that most all of you get this question correct because it's one that is fairly straightforward. Notice that we have the prevalence of French names, right? Toponyms is just place names. That's the fancy word for place names. So the French place names in Louisiana. So we have places that sound French in Louisiana. We have places that sound Dutch in Michigan, that sound Welsh in Pennsylvania. Reflects what? What is it? Is it going to be stimulus diffusion? Well, no, because these are actual French names that are now in these other locations. So they didn't borrow the idea of a French name and make it English or make it native to what Louisiana and Michigan and Pennsylvania. They actually are still keeping the French and the Dutch and the Welsh. Is it hierarchical? Did the French mandate that these names would be placed systematically? You could argue in some ways that if it was an intentional colonization that perhaps this happened, but you'd have to work really hard. It might be sort of tertiary hierarchical, but it ain't hierarchical for sure. So we know it's not stimulus. We know it's not hierarchical. It for sure isn't contagious. Something like naming something doesn't just happen at random, and it doesn't just rub off randomly against other names. Naming is something that happens very intentionally. Systematic diffusion is supposed to be a distractor. That's not even one of our kinds of diffusion. And last but not least, and the correct answer, and you should all have this. If you don't, go back and review the idea of diffusion in the diffusion model video that I made, okay? So because I want you guys to get this. Boom, you guys are awesome. Let's keep on going. So here we go, relocation diffusion. We're going to keep on practicing. Next, how do pop and folk culture compare and how do they contrast? So we've talked up until now about culture being sort of the same, sort of this big idea, right? We've got global culture, we've got local culture, but we want to talk about splitting pop and folk culture into two separate categories. So you've got popular culture, which is the culture of lots and lots of people across lots and lots of different countries and lots of different belief systems. And then you've got folk culture or ethnic culture, which is more local and very specific to a smaller group of people, and we'll talk about that right now. So here we do. We have folk or ethnic culture versus popular culture. Now, you need to write this down. This is a super, super, super important concept. So popular culture, folk culture, you have to have these distinguishing marks. So for folk and ethnic culture, the origins of the culture are oftentimes unknown or difficult to find. They are rooted in tradition, and it is relatively rural or isolated. This is the general beliefs about sort of the core of folk culture, okay? So think about practices that maybe you and your family have that are that you don't exactly know where they came from. It's rooted deeply in the traditions of your family, and it's isolated from other traditions that are around you. That would be an example of folk culture. Popular cultures are oftentimes urban, so oftentimes the origin is going to be in the city as opposed to out in sort of the hinterlands or in the farmlands, okay? It's also highly changeable. So one day you're going to have everyone's favorite song is going to be something by Taylor Swift, and in 2 weeks' time, no one's going to be humming that song anymore. So that for those 2 weeks, that Taylor Swift song is definitely part of the popular mass hysteria culture, but within a very short amount of time, she might even become a forgotten artist. The other thing to keep in mind is that popular culture is very much influenced by media. It's influenced by how it's being presented, by who is presenting it, as opposed to folk culture, which has deeper roots in longer standing tradition and isn't as easily affected by media and how media presents it and how media tries to alter it. Okay, so we've gotten pop and folk culture. So think about the difference between like Arabic coffee and the tradition of Arabic coffee and how it comes about and all of the deep meaning that comes with it. The fact that we don't exactly know sort of where a bunch of the traditions, in fact, deeply originated. Some countries will claim them, but they can't exactly pinpoint where the particular practices started, versus the coffee presented to you at a chain like Starbucks, where pretty much anywhere you go in the world, whether it's Hong Kong or Brazil or Toronto, Canada, you're going to get effectively the exact same cup of coffee. And we know where it started, we know when it started, and we know that, Seattle was its origin, so we've got that urban environment. You can see the difference between these two things. They're both coffee, but one is folk tradition and one is popular tradition or popular culture. All right, time to practice. Pause the video, see if you can answer it. Go. Sometimes you are going to be faced with an AP question that you either know or you don't know. Like, in this case, you've got the Amish. And if you have read up through Key Issue 4, you know the Amish. There's a whole discussion about the Amish in Key Issue 4. I go into a bit of a case study on them. So that's fine. You've got it. And sometimes you're going to be faced with AP questions where you're looking at it and you're just going to have to make an educated guess based off of what you know. So let's say, for instance, you visited the United States and you went to Lancaster County, which is an area that is very famous for the Amish. It happens to be in Pennsylvania. Good for you. You figured out the correct answer. If you know, for instance, that the Amish are very involved in sort of rural farming practices, you could probably still identify that the only place that this would work would be either Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, or Tennessee, Arkansas, and Kentucky. So there again, you probably figured that one out. If you know that the Amish diffused from Germans, right? There's a lot of Germanic in the Amish heritage. Then you probably know that a lot of Germans settled originally into kind of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and then they dispersed into Indiana later. You'd be able to identify that. But this is one of those questions that the question itself is very difficult to answer unless you have some background information. And that's okay. I'm trying to show you guys a wide variety of AP-style questions. The answer here is D. If you didn't know that answer, that's okay, but you will know the answer by the end of this unit, so don't feel discouraged. But you need to recognize that sometimes there are going to be AP-style multiple choice questions that you either just know the answer or you don't know the answer. And if that's the case and you don't know the answer, guess, make an educated guess, and move on. Let's keep going, boys and girls. Okay, here we have a better question that you guys can practice on, that you should be able to come to the answer from what we've studied so far. So go ahead, take a moment, and let's work on it together. Which of the following is true of popular culture? Here we go. We're talking about popular culture. So if I'm taking this test, I'm going to underline or I'm going to highlight the word popular culture. So I'm thinking about it started in an urban environment. It's easily changed. It's affected by mass media. So let's go. It is practiced among homogeneous. Homogeneous means people of the same type around the world. So that's people that are going to be like all Koreans practice it or only Germans practice it. That doesn't sound like popular culture. So we're going to cross it out. It is more static than folk culture. Static means it doesn't change. It stays stuck in the way it is. That is absolutely the opposite. Folk culture is the static one, whereas popular culture is the one that's constantly moving around. So we're going to cross that one out. It incorporates traits that diffuse quickly to a wide variety of places. Diffuse quickly. Well, wouldn't that be like memes and popular television series and movies and music? So that seems to be like the right answer. It spreads primarily through relocation diffusion, which is not true. The only example of relocation diffusion that I gave you guys before was actually folk culture, where the Chinese immigrants were coming from China to San Francisco and they made sort of little Chinatown. So that's wrong. And then it promotes regional diversity. It means that there's going to be a lot of diverse beliefs and practices within a region, and that is absolutely not the case. Remember that popular culture makes everyone and everything feel and sound the same, right? All of the McDonald's look the same, all the Starbucks look the same. Peppa Pig, regardless of what language Peppa is in, is still the same Peppa Pig. So that is wrong. The answer is C. You guys are rock stars because I know you guys got that one right. Awesome, awesome. Let's keep going. Here we go. Here's another question, it looks like. So we have, which of the following best accounts for the universal appeal of blue jeans? I'm going to pause the video and you are going to answer it now. Okay, so which of the following best accounts for the universal appeal of blue jeans? So here we go. The first, we've got the diffusion of popular culture. So universal, that's everybody. Everybody likes it. That's appeal of blue jeans. So that's the diffusion of popular culture. That seems like a pretty good answer to me. The adoption of unique folk culture. Remember, we're talking about the universal draw. Everybody wants it. The adoption of unique folk culture, that doesn't seem like everybody wants it. So we're going to get rid of that one. The impact of high income on clothing habits. Okay, so that means that only people with really wealthy amounts of money are going to be wearing blue jeans. That's not true. Everybody wears blue jeans. The lack of barriers in communist countries? What? This is universal appeal. Are all countries communist countries? No. So we're going to get rid of that one. And the need for durable clothing, meaning that jeans were originally invented because they were really durable. They could last a long time out in the farm and whatnot. And so the only reason why jeans are popular are because they're durable, right? For like working people. Only working people use jeans. Totally not true. So we know that the answer, in fact, is A. You got that one right. That one was a little bit harder than the last one, but I know you guys can get it right. If you didn't, go back and review diffusion. You're going to want to look at that. All right, last but not least, we have why do cultural patterns and landscapes vary by place and region? So here we go. Culture. Culture contributes to a sense of place. It helps shape the global cultural landscape. So here we have two different churches that in some respects look kind of the same. You've got two different churches that have kind of domes on the top. You've got two different, places of worship. I'm saying churches. I apologize. I meant to say that the one on the left is a church. The one on the right is a mosque. I do apologize. I meant two different places of worship. Now, while they have some similarities, they help shape the global landscape. And notice also that the things that the church on the left is made up of are made up of local things like wood. And it looks like it's been made fairly small and compact to combat the Siberian winter. This is a Russian Orthodox church in the middle of Siberia, and it reflects the local landscape. We can see that the materials that are used are from the local environment. It's built in order to combat the sort of the cold climate of the local environment. And you can also see the type of sort of cross at the top of it, which again reflects the cultural persuasion that it is a Russian Orthodox cross. That is not just any old cross, because it's got the three different crosses on it, which is very clearly sort of Russian Orthodox persuasion. So you can see how it shapes that landscape. If you were to come across this, you would know sort of exactly where you were at in the world, because you're not going to find this, say for instance, in the bushes somewhere in Minnesota, right? That's not going to be what a church looks like in Minnesota. Conversely, this mosque is something that we know for a fact is going to be in the Middle East. How do we know it's in the Middle East? Well, partly because of its construction style. You're not going to see mosques that are built with this style exactly, say for instance, in South America, or even in places like Indonesia. They take on components of the local building materials. But also, I want you guys to notice, did any of you guys notice the little flag down here? So this is from the United Arab Emirates, and we know that because of the the idea that culture gives us a sense of place. A flag is part of the United Emirates culture, which gives this mosque a sense of place, and the mosque gives the United Arab Emirates a sense of place as well. Also notice that the difference between the church on the left and the mosque on the right tells us that the church on the left is out in the middle of a very rural environment, whereas the mosque on the right is in the middle of a very urban environment, which again gives us this sense of place. It helps us understand where we're at in the world, what the function of the building is, and what our place next to those buildings is. Let's keep going. It's time to practice. I want you guys to tell me what the best example is of a cultural landscape. Pause the video, try to answer this question, and go. All right, keep in mind that the idea of cultural landscape from what I've just showed you is that idea of a built environment that is specifically designed to help us understand the culture. Like the Russian Orthodox Church or the mosque in Dubai, it helps us understand the culture around it because of this sort of built-up landscape. So what we're looking at is we're looking for an example of something that has been built up, something that's been raised as a part to reflect the culture. So coastal wetland, is that part of a built environment? Does that help us understand cultural landscape? No, coastal wetland is just part of nature. Cloud forest, again, just part of nature. Stand of mango trees, just a part of nature. An eroded shoreline, just a part of nature. So what's the only answer that's not just a part of nature that actually helps us understand the built environment, helps us give us a sense of place in the world of culture? It's the adobe ruins. Those are actual ruins that people built at some point in time, and now they've kind of come to crumbling down, but we can go in with geologists and archaeologists, and we can figure out the culture within these adobe ruins. If you got it right, you're awesome. If you didn't, just think about what it means to have cultural landscape, not environmental landscape, but cultural landscape, and you'll get it next time. We're done, guys. You made it to the end of this video. I'm very proud of you. Our key concepts for this entire chapter are that culture gives society a shared sense of place, but that culture also varies from place to place. So we need to understand how it diffuses, but also the function of culture, which is to give us a shared sense of belonging and place and purpose within our communities. Until next time, I'm proud of you guys. I will talk to you in another video.